Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. Today we're bringing you two intriguing cases. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support us. The first case opens with what seemed like a very ordinary file. A Chinese man applying for asylum in New Zealand in late 2019. He claimed to be an independent Tibetan activist fleeing persecution by his home country's government. It sounded plausible, as many people around the world truly have to leave their countries due to war, religion, or politics, and they seek asylum in other nations as a way to protect their lives. But something about this file wasn't right. Instead of clear evidence of a refugee's escape journey, every detail about his identity became increasingly vague and inconsistent. A self-proclaimed Tibetan activist couldn't speak a single word of Tibetan. These irregularities forced New Zealand's immigration authorities to dig deeper, and the more they investigated, the more they uncovered unexpected clues. Because in documents from Canada, this man's name had appeared in a completely different file, a file related to manslaughter. The mysterious man's name was Li Yang, 34 years old at the time. What made authorities immediately suspicious was when they reviewed immigration records, they discovered Li Yang had arrived in New Zealand about 6 months before filing his asylum application. However, upon closer examination, they realized the personal information he provided on his passport upon entry completely didn't match the personal information he provided in his asylum application. Noticing these suspicious contradictions, immigration authorities decided to dig deeper into Li Yang's background. And the more they investigated, the more confusing details they found. They discovered that Li Yang had changed his date of birth up to 3 different times across various documents. Not only that, his place of birth had also been changed twice. But what made authorities completely doubt his testimony was when Li Yang claimed to be an activist for the Tibetan independence movement. Logically, a longtime activist for this movement would be fluent in Tibetan, or at least know some basic vocabulary. However, when asked to speak Tibetan to prove it, Li Yang couldn't pronounce a single word, not even understanding the simplest questions. After putting all these pieces together, New Zealand immigration authorities believed Li Yang was definitely not a simple asylum seeker, as he claimed instead he was deliberately concealing his true identity. Authorities decided to expand the scope of investigation in multiple directions. They began meticulously checking immigration history, residence history, and even whether he had ever been arrested in the past. During this process, an extremely surprising piece of information emerged. Li Yang's name was suddenly found in Canadian government archives from long ago. But this wasn't ordinary content that a typical international student or immigrant would have. Instead, his name appeared in official Canadian police investigation documents with the charge manslaughter. So what was this mysterious man's true identity? And what had happened in Canada in his past? Before clarifying Li Yang's mysterious past, there's someone we need to know about first. That's a character named Zhao Wei. She was a Chinese student studying in an English language program in Canada. Zhao Wei was a young woman full of energy and vitality, always brimming with enthusiasm for life. She loved exploring new things and was always ready to participate in various activities. Thanks to her cheerful, open, and approachable personality, Zhao Wei always had many friends. However, among that large group of friends, there was one special person, the closest to her. That was her boyfriend, Li Yang. These two young people were practically inseparable. They were always together from morning to night, both in class and when hanging out or participating in extracurricular activities. In the eyes of friends and those around them, Li Yang and Zhao Wei were famous as an extremely affectionate and devoted couple. People often saw them walking together, holding hands, and showing each other tender gestures. Their relationship gradually became more serious over time. Li Yang and Zhao Wei even decided to start living together under one roof. However, behind the happy and romantic appearance that everyone saw, this couple harbored a dark secret that no one around them knew about. It turned out the feelings Li Yang had for Zhao Wei weren't just ordinary love, like what he displayed outwardly. In reality, in his mind existed an incomprehensible obsession, a kind of sick and twisted emotion. Li Yang seemed to not just want to love Zhao Wei, but he also had an intense desire to completely control every aspect of her life. But this wasn't the kind of light, normal jealousy we commonly see in young couples. This was something completely different, much heavier, and far more worrying. Li Yang wanted to know exactly who Zhao Wei was meeting, where she went after afternoon classes, what time she got home. He constantly called to check, constantly asking about every small detail of her day. This boyfriend's obsession and desire for control seemed somewhat excessive and abnormal, but for Zhao Wei at that time, her English proficiency wasn't really good yet, while her parents and family were far away, thousands of miles distant. In such circumstances of being away from home and lonely, the sense of security, the thoughtful care, and having someone always by her side that Li Yang provided was truly immense and important for a young woman like Zhao Wei. Looking from Zhao Wei's perspective and circumstances at that time, although her boyfriend's obsession and control were somewhat severe and sometimes made her feel suffocated, Li Yang was still the only person she could truly rely on and trust in this foreign country. That's why, even if she wanted to, she couldn't easily leave him. And so, they continued to maintain this shaky, contradictory yet still solid relationship until October 9th, 2002. It was on that day that all communication with Zhao Wei was completely cut off. Actually, before that, Zhao Wei and her close friend group had arranged to have lunch together right after morning classes ended. This was a plan made in advance, and she had confirmed she would attend. But at the agreed time, Zhao Wei didn't appear at the location the group had agreed upon. At first, her friends thought maybe she was just running a bit late for some reason, so they tried calling her. However, Zhao Wei didn't answer at all. Her phone kept ringing, but no one answered. The friend group started to wonder, but still tried to think positively. They speculated that perhaps after class, the professor had called Zhao Wei back to discuss homework or talk about grades, or maybe she was busy handling some issue at school. With that thinking, the group finally decided to go to lunch without Zhao Wei's participation. Until that point, none of them thought this was a big deal or that anything worrying was happening, but 3 days passed and they still couldn't contact Zhao Wei at all. She also didn't appear at school during that entire time. This prolonged silence began to make her friends truly worried. Finally, on the 4th day since last contact with Zhao Wei, her friend group decided to take official action. An official missing person report about Zhao Wei was filed with local police. Immediately after receiving the report, police began investigating according to standard procedure. The first person they needed to find and take a statement from was Zhao Wei's boyfriend who was living with her, Li Yang. When investigators came to meet him and began asking about the missing girlfriend, Li Yang's reaction made them pay attention. At this point, Li Yang answered extremely calmly, his tone showing no disturbance. "Well, actually, my girlfriend and I had a pretty big fight. After that, in anger, she left. Since then, I haven't received any messages or calls from her either. I really don't know where she went after leaving." On the surface, this explanation seemed reasonable and could happen, but even though they had fought and his girlfriend had left in anger, now that she had completely disappeared for many days straight, Li Yang seemed too calm, even indifferent. Additionally, according to what friends recounted, the very day after Zhao Wei went missing, that is, when everyone wasn't yet seriously worried, Li Yang had already proactively told several people that his girlfriend was currently out somewhere and seemed to have disappeared. What was strange and noteworthy here was that until that point, most people in the friend group hadn't really thought about the possibility of a serious disappearance, but Li Yang alone had already definitively stated his girlfriend was missing, as if he knew something beforehand. And what was even more contradictory was that when the official missing person report was filed and police began investigating, Li Yang suddenly appeared quite nonchalant, which was very suspicious. However, even though investigators tried to investigate in every possible direction, they still couldn't find any concrete evidence that could prove Li Yang had done anything to Zhao Wei. Not only that, they also had absolutely no clues strong enough to pursue in order to find information about Zhao Wei's whereabouts or location. The case seemed to fall into a complete deadlock. Time just passed by hopelessly and helplessly. About 10 days after the last time anyone contacted Zhao Wei, on October 20th, a horrifying discovery emerged. The location was about a 10-minute drive from the school, near a lake area called Stave Lake, where a travel suitcase had been unexpectedly discovered in very strange circumstances. That afternoon, a young couple was walking near the lake area in the forest when they suddenly smelled a very strange foul odor coming from somewhere near the lake. Curious and wanting to see the source of this smell, they decided to follow the scent. Step by step, going deeper, they finally discovered an old gray travel suitcase that looked like it had been used for years, placed unnaturally there. When they approached closer to check, they noticed inside the suitcase was a thick, rolled-up blanket. At first, this couple thought this was simply an old piece of luggage that someone had thrown away or forgotten here. But the foul smell coming from inside this suitcase was really not normal at all. A feeling of unease gradually crept into their minds. When they bent down and looked through the gap between the rolled-up layers of blanket, they suddenly saw something strange showing from inside. When they focused to look more carefully, they discovered it was human skin. Both people were immediately severely shocked by this horrifying scene. They hurriedly retreated and immediately called the police. Within less than half an hour, police and the forensic team were at the scene. When investigators carefully opened the suitcase to check, the scene inside made even experienced people like them shudder. Inside that cramped suitcase was the body of a young woman, rolled up in layers of blankets. Although the body had undergone considerable decomposition, through examining personal items collected next to the body, and especially through detailed DNA identification, the victim's identity was quickly confirmed. It was Zhao Wei. After conducting a meticulous autopsy, forensic experts determined the direct cause of Zhao Wei's death was strangulation. After discovering the body, police immediately focused on boyfriend Li Yang and began considering him as the main suspect. The reason they suspected him was really very simple and clear. First, Li Yang was the last known person to have seen Zhao Wei alive moreover. Although the girlfriend living with him hadn't come home for a full 10 days, with no news, Li Yang didn't proactively go to authorities to report this disappearance. Instead, now he was even actively going everywhere telling mutual friends that Zhao Wei had had a big argument with him. Then in anger, she decided to pack her bags and fly back to China. But when investigators checked travel records and financial transactions, they discovered Zhao Wei had no airline ticket transactions whatsoever in recent times, nor was there any record showing her passport had been used to exit Canada. Everything Li Yang had told people was completely false. There was another strange and suspicious point. Several days right after Zhao Wei disappeared, Li Yang also suddenly stopped coming to school, continuously skipping without clear reason, cutting off all contact with all friends and acquaintances around him. And then, Li Yang himself completely disappeared without leaving any trace. At this level, with all these abnormal signs piling up, it was really impossible not to suspect Li Yang anymore. The psychological and behavioral evidence was already too clear and strong enough. Now, what police needed was just to find concrete physical evidence to officially charge him. They prepared an arrest warrant and official interrogation. But the big problem here was everything was too late. Li Yang had left Canada long ago. A noteworthy detail is that right on October 20th, exactly the day Zhao Wei's body was discovered, Li Yang had asked some friends for help arranging to escape Canada quickly. Everything happened as if he had planned it carefully in advance. His luggage had been neatly packed and ready beforehand. Even his passport had been arranged to be newly issued or renewed in time. Everything showed this wasn't a sudden or hasty decision, and the destination Li Yang was heading to was his homeland, China. Canadian police immediately contacted Interpol to request cooperation in pursuit. But the big problem was that at that time, there was no extradition treaty between Canada and China. This meant that once Li Yang returned to China, Canadian police had no way to force him back to stand trial. Canada repeatedly sent cooperation requests to the Chinese government, but the answer was always the same. Li Yang is a Chinese citizen. We will handle it according to Chinese law. With this stance, the case ultimately fell into an international legal gray area, where no side could fully exercise authority. The situation remained that way until about a month after the body was discovered. On November 30th, 2002, the case suddenly took a major turn. Zhang Hao, Li Yang's roommate and also his cousin, proactively came forward to Canadian police and gave a shocking confession. According to Zhang Hao's testimony, on the late night of October 9th, exactly the night Zhao Wei went missing, Li Yang had called him in an extremely panicked state. Li Yang's voice trembled. "I killed my girlfriend. You have to help me." At first, Zhang Hao thought this was a joke, or Li Yang was lying too shocked and unable to believe it. But when he went directly to Li Yang's place, he saw Zhao Wei's actual body lying right in the room she had died from strangulation. In this shock, Zhang Hao stood frozen, unable to move. Li Yang looked straight at him and said, "If you don't help me, you're finished too. You've seen the body with your own eyes. The police will consider you an accomplice, so you have to help me." It was both a threat and a desperate plea. Zhang Hao finally couldn't withstand the pressure and participated in hiding the body. The two of them together removed Zhao Wei's clothes, stuffed the body into the travel suitcase, then carried it to dump near Stave Lake. After finishing, Li Yang began acting out that his girlfriend had left after an argument, staging an almost perfect disappearance play. A year and a half later, in June 2004, the trial of Zhang Hao, who remained in Canada, was officially opened. But the result was extremely frustrating and controversial. It turned out police had used undercover investigation methods to get a confession from Zhang Hao. Specifically, Canadian police had several investigators pose as members of a criminal organization to approach and trick Zhang Hao. They told Zhang Hao, "If you want to join our organization, you must honestly tell all the secrets and crimes you're hiding." Hearing this, thinking he was talking to actual gang members, Zhang Hao confessed the entire truth about helping Li Yang hide Zhao Wei's body. Regarding this part, Zhang Hao's defense attorney fought back strongly, arguing that such undercover investigation methods violated the defendant's rights and were illegal, and the court ultimately accepted this argument. In the end, Zhang Hao's confession was not recognized as evidence, and he was released. Thus, the case was once again unreasonably forgotten in people's memory. By 2007, 5 years after the case occurred, Beijing police began reviewing this old case. Finally, an investigation began in China. At this time, Li Yang had changed his name, gotten married, and become the father of 2 children. He was living quietly as an ordinary person, hiding his past. After a long search, Beijing public security was able to arrest Li Yang. In September 2011, Li Yang went to trial in China. This was the first time he was tried for murder. He denied all charges, saying Zhang Hao was lying, and Zhao Wei had left home on the day the incident occurred. He had never seen her. Li Yang hired all of China's top lawyers at that time and claimed the evidence collected in Canada was fake, evidence created by coercive investigation, but ultimately the court didn't side with him. Li Yang was sentenced to life imprisonment and had to pay 1.13 million yuan in compensation to the victim's family. Hearing this news, Zhao Wei's family felt relieved that justice had finally been served. But this joy didn't last long. Li Yang's family immediately appealed. That same year in December, when the appeal trial opened, Li Yang completely changed his attitude. He tearfully confessed with absurd content. He said, "Actually, we were fighting with pillows and I accidentally suffocated my girlfriend to death." That was nonsense. Zhao Wei died from strangulation, but absurdly, this statement was accepted by the court. 3 years after the first trial, in June 2014, Li Yang's charge was changed from intentional murder to manslaughter, and the sentence was drastically reduced to 7 years. At this time, Li Yang had already spent about 5 years from investigation to the appeal trial. Ultimately, Zhang Hao only had to serve 2 more years in prison and was released in 2016. After being released, he traveled throughout Europe. By 2019, he bought a house in New Zealand and began preparing for a new life. And this is exactly when he created the fake identity. He claimed to be an activist for the Tibetan independence movement and a victim of persecution by the Chinese government. As mentioned at the beginning of the story, he painted himself as someone persecuted politically and filed an asylum application with the New Zealand government, hoping to stay legally. But New Zealand wasn't easily fooled. After thorough investigation, his asylum application was ultimately rejected. And to this day, Li Yang continues to litigate, still stubbornly insisting he's someone persecuted politically, pleading with the New Zealand government to accept him as a refugee. Conversely, Zhao Wei's family, the poor girl who lost her life, still hasn't received a single dollar in compensation from this case. Because when the appeal trial changed the charge from intentional murder to manslaughter, the 170,000 Canadian dollar compensation obligation from the original verdict lost its enforceability and was no longer valid. Zhao Wei's family ultimately decided to give up further appeals after legal experts advised they had no chance of winning. They told the media, "What we really want isn't that compensation money. We just want to receive a sincere apology from those who caused this tragedy to our daughter." The main character in the second case is Elise, a woman with shining blonde hair and sharp, very alluring features from first glance. But in complete contrast to this glamorous appearance, her life had not been easy since childhood. She was born in 1981 in a small, impoverished village in southern Brazil. Having lost her parents when she was very young, Elise had to live with her aunt. But her aunt wasn't financially well off either, so from childhood, Elise had to make her own living to afford life. From waiting tables at restaurants, selling clothes at stores, to working as a factory worker, there was no part-time job she hadn't experienced. Meanwhile, she still tried to study and obtained a nursing certificate, then worked as a nursing assistant at a local hospital. Her life was extremely busy, always running between work and studies. Even so, Elise's financial situation still didn't improve much. Because she was still a student, there were limits on the hours she could work, so her income was always barely enough. After growing up, not wanting to be a burden on her aunt, she left her hometown for São Paulo. São Paulo is Brazil's largest city, the center of finance, industry, and culture. Therefore, many young people from rural areas come here looking for opportunities. Elise also carried great hopes when moving to São Paulo. It seemed like the future ahead was all bright and rosy, but reality was far different from what she imagined. Making a living was still unclear with no way out, and finding work in this big city was even harder than she thought. Paying monthly rent already exhausted her, not to mention other living expenses. Worse still, she lost the nursing assistant job she had just found. Completely discouraged and desperate at that time, Elise received a job referral from a friend. It was online escort service. It sounds strange, but to explain simply, this was posting a personal profile with photos online, then accepting clients and engaging in prostitution through phone-booked appointments called Call Girl. At first, Elise naturally refused immediately. But when her financial situation declined to the point where she even owed rent and didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she ultimately accepted the offer. As mentioned, Elise possessed beautiful appearance and a cheerful, approachable personality. Thanks to this, she quickly attracted many clients, and certainly her financial situation improved rapidly. The money earned was much higher than any part-time job she had done before. And it was while doing this work that she met a character who would completely change her life. That was Marcos Matsunaga. This person really wasn't an ordinary man. Marcos was the grandson of Yoki Matsunaga, the founder of a famous food company in Brazil, and was the heir to the family business from childhood. He had lived in the spotlight and was always the focus of media attention. Elise first met Marcos as a high-end client. At that time, Marcos was already married with children, but the moment he saw Elise, he was strongly attracted. After that, the two met many times, and before long, the relationship had developed far beyond the client service provider boundary. They became true lovers. Marcos didn't spare money and financial support, so Elise could completely quit her work. Their relationship became increasingly serious and lasted over a year. Finally, Marcos decided to divorce his official wife and publicly marry Elise. So the two held a wedding and tried to build a relatively normal life like any other married couple. But things weren't as easy as they hoped. This was a union between a plutocratic heir and a woman with a past as a call girl, so they couldn't avoid becoming the focus of social gossip. They had even begun this relationship while Marcos was still married. Perhaps because of this, Marcos and Elise yearned even more for a stable and happy family. But time passed and they still didn't have children. Finally, the couple decided to use artificial insemination to have a child. After several unsuccessful attempts, Finally, in November 2011, they had a daughter. Thus, the path ahead for this couple seemed complete. But just about 6 months later, on May 21st, 2012, a call to the São Paulo police station completely shattered the happy image of this family. My husband said he was going on a business trip, but now I can't contact him at all. He also didn't show up at the company. The person making the missing person call was Elise. According to her account, 2 days earlier, on the evening of May 19th, she had had a fairly big argument with her husband about him coming home late. Marcos was very angry at that time, said loudly, "I'm going on a business trip," and left the house. But after that, all contact with him was lost. The first day, Elise thought everything was still normal because she was also still angry and wanted to give Marcos time to calm down. But by the next day, with still no news whatsoever, she began to feel worried. She tried contacting the company and Marcos's family, but no one knew his whereabouts. At this point, Elise had a bad feeling, so she immediately called to report him missing to the police. Police began investigating right away. Because Marcos belonged to the upper class and was the heir of a wealthy family, they expanded the investigation in various possible directions police investigated around. But all acquaintances said Marcos was a gentle, kind person with no grudges against anyone. Thus, there were no clear clues at all, and the investigation fell into a deadlock. But right at that moment, a shocking report arrived. About a week after Elise reported him missing, on May 27th, police brought devastating news to the Matsunaga family. Roughly 20 miles from Marcos's residence, along a deserted road, someone discovered a large suitcase in the roadside brush. Inside that suitcase was the dismembered body of Marcos Matsunaga, who had been missing for days. In addition to that suitcase, police found 2 more, one in an open field and another in the woods. The most disturbing part, the first body part discovered wasn't even in a bag. It was a bare leg tossed into the forest. Nearby in the tall grass, they found a green bag containing Marcos's clothes. At that point, before the head was found, authorities couldn't confirm the victim's identity. But based on the expensive clothing, they suspected the remains belonged to a wealthy middle-aged man. The final piece recovered was Marcos's head. Forensic investigators used dental records to confirm that the body parts found in the suitcases belonged to the missing millionaire, Marcos Matsunaga. 2 holes were visible in the skull, indicating a bullet had entered through the top of his head and exited through the chin. When all body parts were sent to the coroner, it became clear that the cuts were executed with precision and strategy. The person responsible was either a trained butcher or someone with significant knowledge of anatomy and biology. At this point, police had no leads or suspects, so their first step was to return to the apartment where Marcos had lived. Detectives pulled all available surveillance footage from the day he went missing. Elise had claimed that after Marcos left for work, he never came back. Investigators wanted to confirm what he was wearing that day and whether anything seemed off. On the surveillance footage, Marcos was indeed seen wearing the same outfit, shirt, and jeans he was reportedly last seen in. This suggested he had met his fate on the same day he disappeared. The next video was dated May 19th, 2012, the day Elise returned from visiting her mother. Marcos had gone to the airport to pick up Elise and their daughter. The footage clearly showed the 3 of them returning home together. By this point, Elise must have been seething with anger, knowing she had undeniable proof of her husband's affair from the private investigator. But in the video, her demeanor appeared completely calm. Late that evening, security cameras once again captured footage of Marcos. He took the elevator down alone to pick up a pizza he had ordered. Some viewers later noted that Marcos appeared slightly tense in this video. He accepted the pizza from the delivery person and returned to the apartment. After that, Marcos was never seen on camera again. The following morning, security footage showed Elise struggling to drag 3 heavy suitcases out of the apartment by herself. She struggled to get the luggage into the elevator, clearly exerting a lot of effort. When she reappeared on the camera later, the suitcases were gone. That's when detectives finally began to piece things together. Even if they didn't yet know exactly what had happened inside that upscale apartment, it was now clear that Marcos's death was connected to his wife, Elise. because she had been the only one with him at the time. Elise was promptly arrested. At first, she denied everything, but after multiple exhausting interrogations, she finally confessed to the crime. According to Elise, she and Marcos had been arguing over the phone all day before she returned home. Even during the car ride from the airport, where Marcos picked her and their daughter up, they kept fighting. Once back at the apartment, neither of them felt like cooking, so they ordered a pizza. While waiting for the food, Marcos stood by the window, secretly taking a phone call. Afterward, he seemed a bit off. He told Elise it was his father on the phone, asking him to come by that night, so he'd be heading there after dinner. Elise immediately recognized the lie. Her private investigator had already informed her that Marcos had been spending every night of the previous week with his mistress. As the legal wife, she was furious that after an entire week apart, her husband was choosing to ditch her and their daughter just to see another woman. Naturally, Elise was enraged. She had intended to stay calm and try to talk things out, but hearing yet another lie about visiting his father pushed her over the edge. She began screaming, "I know you're lying!" This time, Marcos reacted in an unusual and cruel way. Instead of calming her down or apologizing, he lashed out. He called himself crazy and paranoid. Elise later claimed that throughout their relationship, Marcos often gaslit her, telling her she was mentally unstable and unfit to care for their daughter. That night, he didn't hold back. He insulted her, saying that if they got divorced, no wealthy man would ever want her again. When Elise brought up his affair once more, Marcos slapped her. It was the first time he had ever physically hit her. Elise shouted, "I'll use the evidence and file for divorce." But Marcos coldly responded, "Go ahead. But don't think you're taking our daughter. I'll have you committed to a mental hospital. You're not fit to raise her." Elise said everything after that moment became a blur. The emotional shock was too overwhelming, and her memory of that night is hazy. But she did remember one thing clearly. She picked up a firearm and shot Marcos while he was standing in the hallway. The distance between them was roughly 6 feet. After pulling the trigger, Elise realized there was no turning back. Panic set in. She was fully aware she'd likely spend the rest of her life behind bars. Her daughter would grow up without a father, and now without a mother too. Then a desperate thought crossed her mind. Try to cover up the crime. She claimed she didn't remember much else, except that she used a hunting knife they had often taken on trips to dismember the body. However, evidence presented in court later contradicted much of her version of events. The forensic report showed that the fatal wound on Marcos's head clearly entered from the top and exited through his chin. A close-range, downward trajectory like that could only have occurred at point-blank range, not from a distance of 6 feet, as Elise had claimed. Moreover, considering the height difference between the couple, it would have been nearly impossible for Elise to inflict that wound unless Marcos had been sitting or lying down, completely off guard, when he was attacked. Investigators also revealed that Elise had used various knife techniques. As a former nurse, she had a solid understanding of human anatomy. And thanks to years of hunting trips with Marcos, she had become skilled at using hunting knives. He had taught her how to skin and dismember animals himself. In a heartbreaking twist, everything Elise knew, she had learned from her husband. Yet she used the very tools he bought her to punish him for betraying her. Perhaps Marcos had been right. Maybe she was crazy. After all, how could a woman calmly dismember her husband's body, stuff it into suitcases, dump them on the roadside, and then return home pretending to be a grieving wife? At the time, everyone who interacted with Elise believed her sadness was real. In court, Elise's defense attorneys recounted the traumatic events of her childhood. They argued that her relationship with Marcos was far from the picture-perfect marriage it appeared to be. Behind closed doors, they claimed, the relationship was marked by manipulation, control, and emotional abuse. One witness testified that from the very beginning of their relationship, Marcos didn't allow Elise to have any male friends. While she was attending law school, he tracked her location every 30 minutes, asking where she was and who she was with. It got so bad that Elise had to warn her male classmates not to speak while she answered calls from her husband. Her lawyers pointed out Marcos's controlling nature. He He frequently called Elise crazy, which over time made her feel worthless and broken. This was a case that deeply divided public opinion. One minute, you might sympathize with Elise. The next, you might be convinced she was a monster. Although many people at the trial expressed sympathy for Elise, there was a key detail that couldn't be ignored. Marcos had never physically assaulted her until the night of the murder. Everything seemed to escalate to a breaking point, and Elise claimed she acted in self-defense. News of a millionaire murdered by his own wife quickly became a national sensation. During the trial, public opinion was split. Interestingly, those who believed Elise were mostly women, while those who doubted her were primarily men. A recurring theme in court was Elise's controversial past. The prosecution repeatedly pointed out that she had once worked as a sex worker, implying that her motive was money. But if Elise had truly been a gold digger, then by all accounts, she had already succeeded. She had financial security, a child, and a privileged life. There was no obvious financial motive to kill. And even if she had once made mistakes out of desperation, did that mean she no longer deserved respect or understanding? Later, Marcos's family requested a DNA test on Elise's daughter. After confirming that the 2-year-old was indeed Marcos's biological child, the family took over guardianship of the girl. In the end, Elise was sentenced to 19 years in prison and is expected to be released in 2035. We believe that dismemberment always takes a crime to another level, because the killer has to sit there for hours. Just the smell alone, as you can imagine, would be unbearable. Elise has repeatedly said she feels guilty and deeply regrets what happened, that she acted purely in self-defense. And those are the 2 cases for today. What are your thoughts on these cases? Share in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next videos.